Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 16th of March, 2023 at 6 p.m. This meeting is also being live streamed. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from councillors Grange, Latham, Sylvester Hall and Ashley Yates.
Any other apologies? Can I, on behalf of the committee, welcome our guests this evening to this meeting. It's very good to have you here with us, and we look forward to your presentation in due course. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Anyone? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Just in the interest of one of the items later on, I probably should declare I'm registered with Darwin Medical Practice.
Anybody else? Any other declaration of interest? Okay. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 8th of February 2023. We go by page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. All in favour? Thank you very much. Fine, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre. And we have with us tonight Chris Bird, Chief Transformation Officer, and part of the team, Abid Khan, and also we have Nicola Bridge, who is the Associate Director, Mental Health, Learning Disability, Autism and Children and Young People. Goodness me, what a title. Thank you. I think if we can, members, we took the decision following concerns as to the impact of our residents and patients following the recent announcement from the ICB that we would invite them to come along to this meeting of Overview and Scrutiny meeting to share and explain to us their proposed plans for the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre and give us some context as to their thoughts that they are pursuing. Perhaps it would be useful for members if you could give us a brief history of the centre and the situation that we find ourselves up, and then bring us up to speed. Members have had a copy of the letter that was sent to stakeholders, and then after we've had the presentation, we'll, through the chair, go into a question session from members to members of the ICB, if that's okay with yourselves. So over to yourselves.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So just for clarity, I have Chris Bird, I'm the Chief Transformation Officer for the ICB. That includes executive leadership for the delegated responsibilities the ICB has in relation to general practice services. My colleagues who you introduced are here for the inpatient mental health item. So it's just myself for the Burntwood item. So as you say, Chair, we've shared the letter that we've published to stakeholders. Just in terms of some background and context, then I'm more than happy to take some questions. This is a decision that's been long in the planning. Actually, I think the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre originally opened around 2008 as what was called a Darcy Centre. That was part of the national policy at the time, and indeed the permission to establish the modular building, as we call it, was granted on the condition that it was taken down after 3 years. Clearly, we're long since past that point. Lichfield District Council Planning Committee have given us extensions to those, the last of which was in October 2019, running through to September 2024. In October 2019, we awarded a 5-year contract, what's called an APMS contract. The nature of that contract means that they're time bound as opposed to general medical services, which are awarded kind of in perpetuity. The intention was within that 5-year period, as it was originally from some time predating that we would redevelop healthcare facilities within the Burntwood area to reflect the growing and changing needs of the local community. Indeed, since that time, we've worked in partnership with colleagues at Staffordshire County Council. So we've opened Greenwood House, which currently houses the Darwin Medical Centre, and we're now working again with colleagues at the County Council to develop what we call Burntwood North, which is planned for delivery on Cherry Close within Burnwood, which backs onto the leisure centre facility, and the idea is that that would be operational from 2025. So in that context, we wrote to the contract holder in confidence earlier this year to signal the intent that the point that the contract does end in September 2024. That would be our intention, and we did have a communication engagement plan that we'd work with local registered patients and the local community to share our thoughts and to support them through the transition process. It's perhaps an unfortunate language, but it's known as dispersal. It's not the best language I recognise. And obviously since then, that plan has become kind of public knowledge. We've been working with relevant stakeholders since then. We are confident that the plans are sound. They are permissible within our delegated authority from NHS England. They reflect the long-term strategic planning aspiration for Burnwood, which reflects the extensions to the planning guidance, planning approvals that we've had. We've engaged with representatives from the local medical committee. We've engaged with colleagues from what are called primary care networks, which have been established in the intervening period by groups of GP practices working together to offer a bit more resilience. And we've confirmed with the surrounding practices, so Salters Meadow, Boney Hay, Darwin, that they have the estate capacity to take the additional patients on, recognising, of course, that over time the intent is to establish the new facility at Cherry Close. So I think that's the kind of background and context to the decision that we've made, and I'm happy to take questions and comments on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I can give a bit more context from the point of view of the people actually living in Burnwood. This was the consultation that we had in 2009, and it went from the 10th of August to the 9th of November. And at the end of that consultation, we were promised 2 health centres: Greenwood House, which has only just been built after all that time, and obviously the new one where the Health and Wellbeing Centre, as you say, was the Darcy Centre originally, as the temporary building. I'll just read from section 3 here, why we need to relocate GP and other primary healthcare services in Burnwood. And it said all GP practices in Burnwood have outgrown their accommodation, this is 2009, don't forget, and are unable to offer new or extended services as they do not have the space. If the Burnwood GP practices are due to continue to meet the health needs of their local population, the accommodation needs to be fit for purposes. So we had that, and because that was in the context of losing Hamwich Hospital, which brought in, let's have a look, £4.3 million to the NHS. The Victoria Hospital in Liverpool City, £6.7 million, and St Michael's Hospital, which was £3.5 million. So, people might feel aggrieved that we've taken so long to actually provide the modern health services or modern health buildings that we want for the surgeries. And in fact, only last month, I see that the Burnwood Health and Wellbeing Centre, for those who have to wait more than 28 days for an appointment, that was 83 patients, that was 4.3%. For Salters Meadow, it was only 1.3%, 58, maybe because you can't get a car parking space. And for Darwin Medical Centre, which I'm a patient, by the way, is 9.2%, which was 951 patients had to wait more than 28 days. Yet you just told us that there is capacity there. I was just wondering if you could, on that particular point, explain the capacity, which seems to contradict what people expect from a surgery. And I'd like to come back on. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so on the first point, Councillor, I think as I say, it's a decision that's been long in the planning. So the documents you referenced from many years ago, I think we'd recognise that it's taken an extraordinarily long time to get to this point, and Greenwood House, as you say, has only recently opened. So we recognise and acknowledge that. In terms of access, I think there's a wider point about GP access. We know that it is difficult for patients to access GP services on occasion. We also know that the levels of appointments for the GPs offer has never been higher. Actually, it's relative to 2019, which is the first full year before the pandemic. The appointments that we've offered today, which are about 4.3 million across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, are about 109% relative to the levels in 2019. So both are true at the same time, which I think is part of the challenge that we have. That general practice has never been busier. They've never offered as many appointments as they have now, but we know that still some patients continue to experience some challenges around access, and we know there is variation. Some practices perform better than others, and there's no doubt about that. And there's a range of approaches that we're bringing forward together with practices to assist that. I think when we talk about, and I think you alluded to it in your own question, Councillor, the physical estate capacity at some of the surrounding practices is constrained. So Meadow in particular. So the practices have confirmed that the physical estate is available to take on the additional patients. As I say, recognising that in 2025 the plan is to open the new facility at Burnwood North. So we're not comparing kind of apples and pears in that respect, because we're looking to the future as part of that. We will, in the intervening period, need to retain Burnwood Health and Wellbeing Centre, so it will stay open post the end of the contract. But we want to work with the practices to establish exactly how best to use it, and our thinking at this stage is that we'll be using it to host kind of back office type staff, so administrative staff, finance support staff, etc., so that we maximise clinical patient facing space at the existing estate prior to the relocation to Burnwood North. So all of that factors into the question that you asked there.
Please, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, following the temporary permissions over the years, by the way, I've also put in lots of freedom of information requests to find out if the Member of Parliament for Lichfield ever actually contacted the NHS about this. And I've not found anything at all. Every time it's been a zilch. But in 2008, it's a proposed development to reconstruct a 2-storey modular building on a temporary basis for an NHS walk-in health clinic, and that was 7 days a week. Then it was renewed in 2011. But there's a little gap between what you're planning and what the situation will be, because in 2019, the last time for temporary planning permission, the condition 1 is this permission shall be for a limited period expiring on the 30th of September 2024. And at the end of this period, the building shall be removed from the site and the land cleared and reinstated to its condition immediately prior to the implementation of permission, blah, 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 or to any other use condition which may otherwise be approved in prospect of the site. So are you confident you're going to get planning permission again between that gap there, the 30th of September 2024? And now you say 2025, but I've got documents here that predicted that the new site, the replacement for the health or permanent health and wellbeing centre was going to be 2012. I've got another document, 2013, and so it goes on. So how confident are you, Chris, for 2025 and what you can do between the 30th of September 2024 and whenever it is in 2025? Not that I understand you haven't even put in planning permission yet. So.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 questions there, if I may, Councillor. So confidence in our ability to work in partnership with Staffordshire County Council to establish a new facility at Burnwood North. I think we've got a high level of confidence about that. There was part of the contingency was the purchase of the youth club site at Cherry Close. I think that's gone through. The track record we've got on working in partnership with them to deliver Greenwood House obviously means we've got a track record there now that we can draw on, and we can help use the experiences of that to help us through the next couple of years. So I think we're very confident about the new facility at Burnwood House. Obviously, our ability to continue to use Burnwood Leisure Centre in the way I described is contingent on an extension to the planning permission. We haven't, as you said, applied for that yet. But as I say, if we're able to secure that, the plan would be to use that on a transitional basis to support the opening of the Burnwood North facility.
Just ask two more questions.
Yeah, okay, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, you say you've got confidence, but then the Greenwood House has only just opened, and it was due to open 2011, 12. You know, so you'll forgive me if I haven't got very much confidence in whoever's in charge of that. So it's up to you to convince me and others, I suppose. The other question is about the consultation. Now, you claim that the ICB, and tell me if this is you're following orders from the NHS, from government, basically, because it's government that set you up. You don't have to consult the patients, those very people paying their taxes and paying for the NHS. You don't have to consult them until after the decision is made, which is what your documents say, although on your website it is about talking about consultation. I just want some clarity on that, because that is the one bugbear for most people. That consultation way back in 2009 went on for at least a month. Your consultation, there isn't one. This is what we're doing. You're dispersing it, and I appreciate that you were not happy with that particular term that you have to use. But then you're going to consult. We're not even a consultant. I think it's a conversation. Well, I can have a conversation now with my colleagues over here and argue with them. That's still a conversation. That's not really consultation, though, is it? So, are you following orders, so to speak, from the way you've been set up, or do you have some flexibility there? I mean, it's a tough question, but you know,
it's a direct question to which I'm happy to give a direct answer. So we're not following orders. No one's instructed us not to consult with the public. There are guidelines that we need to follow. So in this particular case, there are guidelines around primary medical services for the delegated responsibilities that we have from NHS England. There are certain provisions in there for when we do and do not need to consult, and those provisions do not extend to the closure of the ending of a contract of an APMS nature, as I described earlier. There are, hence the second item on the agenda today, other guidelines that we need to follow for when some of our service proposals meet the threshold for major service change, and that applies to the proposals around the inpatient mental health services. It doesn't apply to the proposals around Burnwood Health and Wellbeing Centre.
So you're consulting with the very people who's going to benefit from the contracts, the GPs and their practices, under the extract from the primary care forum that you held on the 10th of January. But you don't. You're only saying you didn't have to choose to. You chose not to consult patients, or you just said that you didn't have to consult patients. Which was it? As you said, there were guidelines. You're not following orders. You're following guidelines. So a guideline mean that there is some flexibility. I always thought.
Yes, so there are guidelines that govern how ICBs now, in relation to the delegated responsibilities that we have from NHS England, discharge those responsibilities. Part of that actually is that we do secure the support of the local medical committee to the proposals, and that we engage with local practices to confirm that they have the capacity to take on the additional patients in the way that we discussed earlier. There are provisions, as I say, for when you do and do not need to consult with local populations. On this occasion, they didn't apply. We did have a plan, communication and engagement plan, as I described, to engage with patients following the later in 23-24 to support them through the transition. I would remind the committee again that this is a 5-year contract that was always due to expire in September 2024. So linked to a decision that was taken some years ago, as you described there, Councillor. So a lot of that kind of consultation work was done previously. And I'll absolutely take the point that there's been a lengthy process between then and now. But as I say, the guidelines are very clear in terms of the flexibility and the arrangements that we have.
I'd like to come back later.
Yeah. Can I just clarify that then, Chris? So you're saying that there is you could have, if you'd wanted to, engage with the population, with the residents, if you wanted to, but as part of the decision that was taken 5 years ago, there's no actual necessity to do that at this particular time.
So not necessarily about 5 years ago, because the decision 5 years ago is back to award a contract. The guidelines that we're following now give ICBs now flexibility about whether they do or do not need to consult with local populations in this particular case, because it's a contract that is ending at the end of the specified period, which we were really clear about would be a 5-year period. There is flexibility to ICBs to conclude that there wasn't a need for consultation. That's separate to our requirement to engage with the local population in terms of supporting the transitional arrangements.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of Burntwood. I am a person who lives in Burntwood, but not attached to this practice. But I have to say that you've answered the first question to a certain extent, but I am astounded really that you haven't been prepared to engage with the patients at the Health and Wellbeing Centre, or indeed with any other of the Burntwood practices, to inform them of the changes that you intend to make. Because for everybody, health is obviously their number one concern. And you must be aware of how worried people are about the outcomes. Because to a lot of people in Burntwood, it doesn't appear that you've got much compassion for the quality of care that will be perceived as being available across Burntwood when you actually close this unit before the anticipated surgery at Cherry closes up and running. And I can't understand why you're in such a hurry to disperse people, although you've explained it to a certain extent, but that doesn't help those people in Burntwood, and you're not prepared to wait. And the disperse is your word, and you said it's not a very favourable word, but it is the word that is used. So maybe you've answered some of that, but there might be something that you can actually say, because the patients here and those that are listening at the moment on YouTube, they're doing it because they are really, really concerned. And their patients, from my understanding, that you've got the moment at the Health and Wellbeing, they're very happy with the care they're receiving now. So that to inform them now that they've got to find alternative provision for maybe a brief time, isn't that a little bit premature to be doing that? And as Councillor Norman has said, years ago, we were promised a new centre on the leisure centre site, and a considerable amount of money at that time was spent on plans and meetings, etc. We had all the plans drawn up, the architect was from Holland, and it all came to nothing. There must have been an awful lot of money wasted in that at that time. And I know all of that because I did attend a number of meetings at the time. So where is the guarantee? And I am going to be repetitious as to what's already been said. Where's the guarantee that the centre will be built, and especially that it'll be ready for 2025, considering the experience we've had with the Darwin Centre or the Greenwood House Centre, whatever you want to call it. And so therefore, why can't you leave patients where they are till then? Why do you have to get them to find an alternative GP, and then maybe when the surgery opens again to actually move back to where they were? I can't see much point in that. One of the things you have said is that there won't be any impact on patient care for the local population. So how are you going to do that? Because it's so stretched at the moment that I can't see how that is going to work. Especially as we know there is a desperate shortage. We've been told in this meeting many times and elsewhere, desperate shortage of GPs across the whole country. So we do have concern, because in the past I know it's been difficult for whoever it is to recruit doctors within the Burntwood area. And the people of Burntwood are, particularly those registered with Health and Wellbeing Practice, they do have a voice and they will use it, even if you're not going to actually engage with them at all. I'm not using the word consult because you don't want that word used, but if you don't engage with them, they are going to want to stand up and say what their opinions are. And that's why to me, it's really important that you listen to what they've got to say, because they want their health needs sorted in the best way possible. And if you're going to make drastic and considerable changes to healthcare provision in Burntwood, why don't you think that people don't need to know that, and know as you're going along with this process, they need to be kept informed? There are, as we know, numerous problems, and you've alluded to it a little bit, at the moment in all the GP practices, with the community not being able to get appointments when they want, and they're having to wait a long time for telephones to be answered, and actually being able to get an early appointment and having to wait for a long time, as Councillor Norman again has said, is really not acceptable to a lot of people, because we're not.
Councillor, should we get those questions answered first?
I was nearly at the
Because
end.
there's quite a few questions you put in
Yeah,
there.
well,
I'm
I've
feeling that
got.
we don't lose the thread of those
Okay.
questions. That was all. You can come back then and ask any of us that haven't been answered, but if we get those answered first, please.
Yeah, okay. So just in respect of the contracts, as I say, it's a 5-year contract due to end 2024. One of the reasons in our thinking in awarding the contract for the 5-year period was in response to local mood about the need to incentivise us to move quicker than we had been doing in terms of developing more modern healthcare facilities. So there is no extension provision within the contract. So there is a gap. We've been open about that. The contract will end 2024. The new facility is not due to open 2025. We will need to manage that gap, but there is no provision within the contractual terms to the extension. We did engage with local practices. I think you said that we didn't, Councillor. So just to be clear, that we did. Salters Meadow, Boney Hay, Darwin Medical Centre all have confirmed, as I said earlier, that they've got the capacity to take the patients on. That was as a result of direct engagement with those practices. And it's not that we don't intend to engage with the local population. As I said earlier, we do have a communications and engagement plan. I think it sounds like Council has got an extract from the Primary Care Forum, which includes that in the report that we considered. What we did was take action to write to the contract holder best part of 15-16 months prior to the contract end to signal the fact that the contract would end at that point. The intention was for communications and engagement activity takes place later in 23-24. And indeed, colleagues from the ICB are meeting with the chair of the patient participation group at Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre tomorrow. So there is a range of activity that is taking place.
Councillor, any more? All your questions have been answered, or you should
Just
carry
a
on?
couple of things.
Yeah, carry on.
The pandemic has obviously made things totally different for people accessing surgeries, and maybe that has sort of influenced some of the ways that things have developed. But again, that is a concern. But my biggest concern is 5,000 plus patients across the health and wellbeing having to find alternative provision for a period of time. And that's what I was saying about why are you not keeping it running? If you're going to ask for some permission to actually keep those buildings there, why can you not keep the surgery running until you've got the new one up and running?
So I just need to be clear, I guess, that we're not asking patients to register with alternative GP practices for a period of time. What we're saying is that the contract under which patients currently receive their GP services through the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre, that contract will end in 2024. We will work with patients to transition their registration to a surrounding practice of their choice. But that's one move. There won't then be a subsequent move to another GP practice. So just that the point you were making about the alternative provider for a period of time, it will be one move from registration with Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre to registration with perhaps Salters Meadow, perhaps Boney Hay, perhaps Darwin Medical Centre. But once that registration change has been done, that will be the sole move that patient will need to make. The venue from which they receive their care may change as we develop the Burntwood North estate. So clearly, if you're a patient going to Salters Meadow, if you're a patient going to Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre now, and you choose to receive your care going forward from Salters Meadow, you may receive that care at the Salters Meadow estate from the centre there, and then in time go to Burntwood North. But that'll be true of a number of patients in the area as we establish the Burntwood North facility in the same way that we did with Greenwood House.
Just a final point then, I think the problem is that you've made a lot of people very suspicious of your actions because you haven't appeared to come clean to them. You may feel that you have, but talking to people within the Burntwood area, they are concerned and they will continue to be concerned if you're not going to liaise with them.
And as I say, the intention was always to liaise with patients through the communication and engagement plan. As I say, we wrote to the contract holder in confidence to provide ample notice of the fact that in our view the contract would expire at the natural point it ended. The plan was to engage with local populations later in 2023, my teeth in. But obviously we've had to accelerate those plans now because the communication we made available to the contract holder has now become available in the public domain.
Thank you. Just before I pass on, Mr. Bird, you said earlier that it was your intention to continue to use the facility at the Health and Wellbeing Centre for back office facilities. Is there any reason why that couldn't be used to see patients at the same time?
No, so that'd be part of the evaluation process that we'd want to go through over the next few months to determine how best to manage the transition from the contract closing in September 2024 through to the Burntwood North facility being available. So that option's on the table. Our hypothesis at the moment is that we'd use it for back office function. It's not, there are other estate available in the local community, but it's certainly an option that we're willing to explore with the registered patient population.
So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that if these patients are moving to a new practice, be it Salters Meadow or Darwin, that they could actually still utilise the building they've been using now, seeing a different doctor?
It's possible. We'd need to work with the surrounding practices because obviously they'd need them to provide the clinical and the medical staff to meet those patients in that facility. That may introduce some disincentives around economies of scale for the existing clinical staff that they have in the other estate. So we need to work through with them, but it's an option that we're willing to explore, certainly.
Thank you. Councillor Tranter.
Thank you. One or two of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked, but one major thing that worries me immensely is that I am the ward councillor where the Darwin practice is cited, and I have had numerous complaints about the length of time of seeing the doctor, but more so that because the Darwin practice covers a part of Lichfield, they are asking Burntwood residents to go to Lichfield, of whom some are 80 years old, got disabilities with walking, don't drive, haven't got any transport and can't get there. And then they've been told they've got to wait 6 weeks, 7 weeks before they can get an appointment with the Darwin practice. And equally, they're being asked to go to Lichfield, and the Lichfield residents of the Darwin practice are coming to Burntwood. And on top of that, you're going to be asking a few more thousand, if you like, to go on the list to try and get appointments at the practice. And it's just going to be horrendous. So what's the answer to that?
I'm afraid I don't know the specific issues around the complaints at the Darwin Medical Centre. I'm more than happy to for you to share those with me afterwards, and I'll happily pick those up. I think a number of practices do have what we call branch sites. So I've mentioned Boney Hay a few times in Bournemouth. That indeed is a branch site from Langton Medical Practice here in the centre of Lichfield. So there are occasions when patients need to travel between sites. That is a regular part of the delivery of general practice services. But I would say that in those circumstances, the needs of the local population, the needs of the local patient should be borne in mind when establishing those arrangements. So I don't know the details, but I'm more than happy to look at them if you share them with me afterwards.
Ms. Bird, we do understand that an offer was made by the existing practice at Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre to become a branch site and also to offer additional services of a Saturday opening. Has that been considered at all by yourselves?
So I think the Saturday opening is up and running. I think it was opened for a period before Christmas. It then closed for a while, but I think it is open again at the moment. That isn't the service that we commission. That's a service that the contract holder has decided to offer to local patients through his own offices. So I don't particularly want to comment too much on that. In relation to can Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre become a branch site of a what's called a GMS, General Medical Services contract that the contract holder holds elsewhere, that isn't permissible within the guidelines.
It's not permissible.
It's not permissible. It's not an option.
But it would be permissible to utilise the building for the patients of one of the other practices if you felt that was the way forward to get the service to the public, to the patients.
Yeah, as I say, it's an option that we're willing to explore in the intervening period. But so the contract holder asked us to consider a number of alternative options. One of which was could we consider Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre to be a branch of his other contracts that he holds with us, and as I say, that's not permissible in the guidance. The other option he asked us to explore was whether we could convert, in effect, an APMS contract into a GMS contract, and again, that's not permissible within the guidance. So the options within the guidance are, as we've shared in the stakeholder letter, and we've said unfortunate choice of language is not language we would choose to use. It's language in the guidance, but that is around then dispersal to other practices.
Councillor Whaley.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask my question, I think it's right for me to declare that I'm actually a patient at the Boney Hay surgery, have been since birth, but back then it wasn't a Langton Medical Group.
Can you remember that? Yeah.
Not specifically, no. But as you can imagine, so I am now a Burntwood councillor, and I've had local residents contact me over the last week with concerns about the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre. So I need assurances tonight that these residents who are patients at the centre will have no disruption to their care. Are you in a position to give that assurance tonight?
So as I say, Councillor, the intention was always to engage with registered patients and local communities and help them manage that transitional process from registration from Burntwood to whichever of the surrounding practices they wanted to register with. The whole aim of that is to minimise any disruption. We're not anticipating any disruption. We have managed dispersal of lists previously. So the team that I lead around primary care covers all 143 practices within Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. You will realise that sometimes we have challenges around those practices. So it's not something that we're unused to. It's not a regular occurrence, I will acknowledge, but it's not something that we've not got experience in as well. So I'm as confident as I can be that we would be engaged with local registered patients to help them manage that transition, and therefore there would be no disruption to their care.
So to clarify, the onus of the responsibility to transfer to a new practice is on the patient.
Yes, because the registration at Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre would end at the point that the contract ended. But as I say, the September 2024, our plan was to be engaging with local registered patients a full year ahead of that in later in this calendar year. The action we took in confidence was to show the contract holder in advance of that, so that appropriate plans could be put in place, and we could work with the contract holders to secure that smooth transition to the new arrangements. So we did have a kind of 12-month plan of working with patients. The onus is on them, but we recognise that onus is linked to a decision that we are taking. So as I say, there was already a plan to work very closely with the registered patient population to help them manage that process.
Councillor Tranter, I didn't give you the chance to come back. Do you want to come back at all?
No.
From me again, Mr. Bird. So are we saying that there is no way that the 5-year contract that's been entered into could be extended in any way, shape or form until the new health and wellbeing, until the new centre is open on Cherry Close? Is that right?
So the current provisions of the contract do not allow for extension. If we work into that space, we'd be awarding a new contract, and that isn't our intention. Our intention is to allow the current contract to expire in September 2024, and then work with surrounding practices to come up with a plan to manage the space between September 2024 and the creation of the Burntwood North facility.
Councillor Norman.
Yeah, just a couple of simple question. Why can't you offer a short-term contract, and presuming that it's not viable, shall I say, for the gap between the new health centre and the one being demolished, as I expect it to be in September?
So we're not able to offer a further contract. APMS contracts are usually kind of 5, 10, 15 years in duration rather than a short form contract.
But back to the original contract there. Well, why was it the contract written in such a way that you couldn't extend it? Was it your predecessors really, I suppose, but was it absolute confident there'll be a new health and wellbeing centre or health centre in Burntwood? And if so, what's gone wrong? Is it the county side or your side or whatever? Because I do know that the leader of the council, Alan White, as soon as he became leader, he did make progress in Burntwood for the Greenwood House, and then so I've got issue there. But I just wonder what the reason is. If you absolutely had that in there, it would end such a date. Why didn't that work? Why didn't everything get organised so that it would be no gap between there and the last?
So it is possible to award contracts with an extension period. So we do have other APMS contracts in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent that are for a defined period of time with an option to extend. So that is an option that was available to my predecessors in 2019, as you described.
You notice how I said your predecessors?
Yeah. Talking to colleagues who were around at the time, the awarding of the 5-year contract with no option to extend was to reflect some of the local challenge we had at that point, that the length of time, as you alluded to earlier, in terms of bringing forward new facilities had already been an extended period of time. So the defined contract period was designed to incentivise the establishment of the new facilities. In the event, clearly we've not quite got there, and there's another kind of 12-month period that we need to navigate.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm only any good if I've got a deadline to meet, so you should have employed me for that period. My last question, very simple one, straightforward, just for clarity, which is, I appreciate Chris coming along here and facing these questions, and also the configuration of this room, which I'll refer to at a later stage, which is helpful. But just to be absolutely clear, the guidelines that you follow, which in my view and others don't involve consultation in the way that we as councillors understand consultation, they are set by the NHS.
Indeed, yeah, primary medical services guidance, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Not for the first time, I've got a few, so are you happy for me to just...
Perhaps take them in threes, possibly. Just so that we can...
So the first one is around that guidance on contracts. I won't reproduce some of the language that I've got in my notes here. That guidance regarding the contracts, is that statutory guidance, or is that something where it's strongly recommended that you follow this guidance, but there is some leeway within it, or is it statutory guidance from the NHS?
So primary medical services guidance is national guidance that we, as I say, we do need to follow. It does have some flexibility in provisions within it for local discretion.
So those flexibilities that are allowed within that, they can't be extended to the situation where we're potentially we could just look at this APMS contract and extend it for 9 months until Cherry Close is open.
So as I say, the contract form that was awarded in 2019 was for a defined period of time with no option to extend. So we're not able to extend the current contract. We could award a new contract, but not for a 1-year period.
So again, then it appears that actually the rod that's been made for your back here comes more from the fact that this guidance isn't functioning for the needs of Burntwood. Have there been any conversations with the NHS centrally in terms of whether that can be waived in this particular instance?
No.
Thank you for that. Just moving on to the Burntwood estate improvement, which I mean I can't think that anybody would be unhappy with improving access to GP facilities and upgrading them. I've not actually been in Greenwood yet. I'm registered with that practice. It certainly looks a lot nicer from the outside. That change that was made in terms of upgrading Greenwood, did that add any additional space or physical capacity to increase the number of FTE GPs?
Yes, so there is a number of, I think the capacity for the Greenwood House facility, I'll have to confirm this, but I think it's 20,000, which is an increase on what was available previously across the quantum of the practices. And there's a number of other rooms that are available within the facility as well.
Not the two sheds, right?
Thank you for that. I mean, I think the real reason that we're asking there is that there's a very numerical thing that we can look at there. And I mean, notwithstanding the fact that the ICB applied for £620,000 worth of funding from this council for additional UV capacity in the district not so long ago, that I think it's 5,000 patients that are going to need to be dispersed. That additional capacity at Greenwood House, I don't believe will meet that 5,000 unless, I mean, I'm more than happy to be corrected. But I think that additional capacity falls somewhat shy of the 5,000 we're hoping to disperse.
So I think the patient list size is about 4,800. So yeah, I mean, 5,000 in round numbers. So as I say, we've worked with the practices in the surrounding area to assess whether they could take the capacity. Each have confirmed that they could, but that's in the context of the development of the Burntwood North. So we're not expecting all 5,000 to be seen at the Greenwood House.
So thank you again for that. It's I mean, I think we can kind of tell it's a very live issue. It's something that really matters to people, and that's why we're spending so much time on it tonight. Access to primary care is something that really it really does affect people for obvious reasons. I'm not going to try and tell you guys why, because obviously you're the experts much more than I am. In terms of the primary care networks within the district, I believe it's 4: Lichfield, Burntwood, East Staffs run the one in Albury was, I believe, and we've got some from Mercian, I think. In terms of those, are we aware how the kind of the patient to GP ratio stacks up across those primary care networks?
I'd need to take that away and provide that information to you.
My understanding is that Burntwood actually has the highest patient to GP ratio already, and that kind of goes alongside the council that the data holds, which of the 22 wards in our district, the 4 Burntwood wards, Boney Hay, Chasetown, Chase Terrace, Summerfield, and All Saints, those kind of 4 key real core of Burntwood wards are all within the bottom 6 in terms of access to healthcare. And I think that is one of the major drivers here, is that people do feel that it's difficult to get GP appointments at the minute. We know that's a national thing, but we're also aware that there are specific drivers in Burntwood which drive poor health because of a variety of things. That a lot of that's historic and a lot of that's demographic driven. But there is a concern, and the data certainly that's available to me certainly suggests that actually Burntwood is a place where we should have a lower patient to GP ratio than elsewhere in the district. And it certainly seems to be it's the other way around. And I think that's one of the real concerns here, is that the quantum that we're putting onto Greenwood House is probably greater than the additional capacity that's in Greenwood House. And there may be additional capacity over Salters Meadow and Langton and things like that. But I know Councillor Norman kind of went through some of the data in terms of people waiting more than 30 days for an appointment and things like that. That dispersal cannot improve that data in terms of people waiting certain lengths of time for appointments. I suppose the drive that I'm trying to get at here is what can be done in the meantime, because it sounds like there's a problem to begin with, this dispersal, although it's because of this guidance, which appears to just be making this an impossible thing for you guys to pick up. What can we do in the meantime to kind of bridge that gap? Because it could be 9 months of really significant delays for people.
So I've not got the specific information that you've got there, Councillor. I'm happy to have a look at it if you're willing to share it. I mean, I think on the wider point, it is certainly true, as I've said earlier, that some patients do experience challenges in accessing GP services. We know that. Our GP per head of ratio is just below the national average. But that has actually come down quite considerably over the past couple of years. So we know that that's given us a challenge. That's in part because of the demographic of the GP profile in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent tends to be older people who've retired. We've not got the numbers coming in at the bottom end to replace them. There's challenges nationally, as you allude to, in terms of recruitment and retention, and we see those in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. There's a number of things that we're doing to improve access at the moment. So colleagues may be aware of something called the Additional Role Reimbursement Scheme. That's a national programme which provides funding to PCNs to recruit roles such as clinical pharmacists, first contact physios, mental health support workers, all of which are designed to augment GP capacity. We have a range of digital methods of communication in terms of online appointments, telephone appointments. Roughly about across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, they account for about 30% of all GP appointments. There's the development of some services at home, so blood pressure monitoring at home, for example. So there is a range of things that we're doing, but we also know that fundamentally we need to improve the number of GPs we have recruited to support patients across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. There was a national report published last year called the Fuller Report. Colleagues may be aware of it. It was it's called the Fuller Stock Take in kind of national circles. It was led by a lady called Dr. Claire Fuller, and that set out kind of 4 principles of how general practice can improve into with a particular emphasis on access. We are developing a general practice strategy on the back of that, so our local response to the national Fuller Report. We're more than happy to come back here and share that with you. Probably 3-4 months time, I would suggest is the time we need, but more than happy to do that, and that'll pick up some of the issues that you described there, Councillor. In the meantime, as I say, more than happy to have a look at the specific data you're referencing.
Councillor Robertson? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of that, I mean, it's great to see a lot of those things coming through, and I think some of the additional roles to take some of the pressure off GPs is I think we all know that's the future of healthcare. Are there any specific interventions planned over the next 9 months in Burnwood to drive more of those roles to this area so that we are responding to this situation as it's coming through?
So the design of the ARRS role requirement is a matter for PCNs locally. We have got access to funding, so we're able to support the PCNs in that recruitment process, and we'd want to work with PCNs in informing their views about the roles that they need. So there is close collaboration with general practice. As I say, the general practice strategy, that's to say, we're more than happy to bring through, that has got workforce as a kind of central component to that. And again, I'm more than happy to share those plans.
Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Chair. I'm coming towards the end. I've got kind of 2 and any follow-up that comes from them. The first one here is regarding the current GPs who are working at Burnwood Health and Wellbeing Centre. So obviously the contract holder is in that position where the contract can't be extended. The guidance isn't allowing the ICB any wiggle room by the looks of it. The individual GPs, will there be a process to allow those to be over to the existing practices?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that actually leads into the last point that I was going to make in terms of continuity of care for people who've got complex conditions. Now, I'm very fortunate. I'm under 40. I'm relatively good health. So I don't necessarily have that regular return to doctors, and I'm not in that situation where I need a doctor to understand my medical conditions and my medications and the process that's got us to here. My major concern here is that we're talking about potentially some of those 4,800 people who are going to be dispersed now, and then later on taken into Cherry Close, and there's potentially in the space of 9 months 2 changes in there. And I am quite sure that every single piece of evidence that's ever been written will say that actually that primary care needs to be delivered by people who've got a relationship with the patient, particularly on those complex medical needs. What planning has gone in to make sure that that continuity of care exists throughout both of these changes that will be happening in the next 9 to 10 months?
So I think that relates to Councillor Ho's question earlier about kind of reassurance of how we manage that transitional process. And it's one of the reasons we signalled to the contract holder so far ahead of time that we'd want to work with him and his colleagues on supporting people in that transitional process, particularly for those patients who do have long-term conditions or complex health issues that do require perhaps a more protracted period of transition than perhaps those of us who enjoy routinely better health and we access general practice services on a kind of ad hoc, sporadic basis. So there is a plan being formulated to work with the contract holder and his staff, and then the receiving practices about how we transition those arrangements. As I say, we have got quite extensive experience in managing dispersals. Obviously, we've got the recent experience of the transition around Greenwood House to call on. So I think that's a matter of working with the contract holder, his team, and those patients that are identified to us for a kind of risk stratification process is perhaps needed a bit more support than others. But that support will be readily available.
Councillor Robinson, fine.
Yeah, it is just one final one in there. And I've now got that far into the sentence, I've forgotten what it was, which is not very helpful.
Should we come back? Should we come back to
follow
you?
via email if it comes to me? I do apologise.
We're going to Councillor Ho, and then if you come back, if you remember, Councillor Ho.
Thanks, Chair. So we've already been told that the onus of transferring to a new GP practice would be on the patient, but with the support of the ICB. When my previous energy supply went bust, the regulator automatically transferred me to a new supplier, and then I had the option to move if I wanted to, and that took away the stress, it took away the worry, and it guaranteed that there would be no disruption in my energy supply. Why can't this principle be applied for the patients of the Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre? Thank you.
So if you look at the registered patient population of Burntwood Health and Wellbeing Centre, 75%-ish are within the 2 postcodes immediately adjacent to the centre. But there are some patients who reside in Lichfield or Cannock or other places, and that's because people tend to register with their nearest GP practice, but then life goes on and people move house, but sometimes they change the registration, sometimes they maintain it. So it wouldn't be for us to tell patients which of the surrounding practices they would be better registered at. That depends on the nature of their own personal circumstances, depends where they live relative to some of the other centres, depends on the nature of their conditions, as the councillor says. Some may want, if a particular GP elects to transfer to Salters Meadow as part of the GP transfer process, they may decide to follow them for continuity of care. So I think we're, as I say, more than happy to give a commitment that we would work with patients and practices to ensure a smooth transition. But I don't think it's for the ICB to determine which of those practices patients should move to.
Councillor Ho, do you want to come back?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Nah, it's gone.
Anybody else who owns Dave want to come back?
Well, only to mention my reference to the 2 sheds wasn't flippant. They were a great success during COVID, and we praised Dr. Ward at the time for them, because it was just brilliant the way it all worked during the worst part of that.
I think, Chris, there's a clear message that seems to be coming around from this table, is that we are extremely concerned as to the way in which this is going to be handled, and our patients and our residents, and as the disruption that will cause to them in what you're planning to do. And if there's any way in which you can ensure that perhaps the information is coming back to us here, so that we can know what's going on over the next few months, so that we can make sure that we're able to inform our residents as well from our point of view, and also to give us some reassurance that you're doing all you can to reduce that disruption. And if there is an opportunity for patients to continue using the existing facility, if that can be done in the future, that will help for some patients, then we'd like you to consider that as well. But please be aware that we are extremely concerned as to how this will affect our patients and our residents over the period of time before the new facility is built. And with that, I'm going to bring in Councillor Eagland.
We did say earlier on, Chris said he would come back and report to us how things are going. I would like to encourage that, please.
Thank you, Chris.
So just to say yes, absolutely. I think we, as I say, there was always an intention to work with registered patients and local populations full 12 months ahead of the contract ending. We have had to accelerate those plans in light of the information becoming public. More than happy to work with this committee and other colleagues to provide the assurances that they need, that we're managing that transition in a smooth and effective way as possible. That's no problem at all. I think the commitment we made was to bring back the general practice strategy. More than happy to do that. More than happy to come back to the committee on the specific point about Burnwood Health and Wellbeing Centre as well.
Yeah, I think the committee would welcome that, and certainly before the September deadline of when it sort of all starts to happen, we'd appreciate that. Thank you. So thank you very much for coming along, Chris, and doing that. We'll move on to item 5, which is the George Bryan Centre. Again, a facility that is affected by our residents and of concern to us all as to how people will in the future be able to access this type of facility moving forward. So I think you've got a presentation for us this time to begin with. So we'll have the presentation, and then we'll open it up again to members for questions. Thank you.
We have, and if I may just offer some brief opening remarks. So the ICB is considered as the statutory body for the consultation. So whilst we're joined by Dr. Parr from Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust and my colleague Nikki from the ICB, as I say, is the statutory body to coordinate all the consultation process. And working with Staffordshire County Council Overview and Scrutiny Committee, we have determined that the proposals do meet the threshold for public consultation activity. We agreed in January 2023 with the Staffordshire OSC that consultation period would be for a 6-week period. We are in that consultation period now. We've got a couple of weeks left. So the presentation that you're about to receive is material that we use as part of that consultation process, and then colleagues will be more than happy to answer questions.
Okay, so in terms of the content of the presentation, what we're going to outline is the reason we're reviewing our local hospital mental health services, and also present the community support that we have for people with mental health needs and those that need dementia care, and then ultimately present the proposal in terms of the actual inpatient provision. Okay. So there is a national model around the future for mental health services, and that's articulated in something called the long-term plan. And it very much talks about person-centred care and ensuring the services are joined up, that patients and carers should be very much more directly involved in decisions about their care and treatment, and that it's easier to get the right service for your needs and to get that support far more quickly. It's also very much focused on care should be given within the home and the community wherever possible. And that inpatient care should only really be provided when it's absolutely really needed and there is no alternative, and that inpatient stay should be as short as possible, so that patient can safely return to home really, and continue that support within the community. So we recognise for some time that now we need to work quite differently to respond to this national guidance, and to ensure that we're supporting far more people to remain in their usual place of residence and actually avoid the need for a hospital admission in the first place. That's also backed up by a lot of clinical evidence, and Dr. Khan will be very familiar with all of that. But the clinical evidence really demonstrate that patients get the best outcomes if their mental health care is provided within the community setting rather than in a hospital. And particularly for older adults and those with dementia, the clinical evidence suggests that actually hospital stays really don't help them, and there's a real serious risk of them losing their independence. So for those individuals with dementia, hospital admissions can actually make their dementia symptoms worse, can permanently reduce that person's independence, and it can make it more likely that following that hospital stay, they are not as able to go back to home and actually need a sort of residential provision to be put in place. So in terms of the support in the community for mental health needs, so we've been working over the past few years really to enhance the provision around community mental health services. So very much focused on improving access to care, making sure that we get earlier treatment and support. So examples of things that we've done, we've introduced things like the 24/7 urgent access line that anybody can call, and you can see that number on all of the slides. Services like improving access to psychological therapies, which is now been rebranded to talking therapies, where people can self-refer and be able to get access. And then the roles that we were talking about earlier, those additional reimbursement roles, so that we're putting more mental health practitioners within GP settings, so that that full first appointment can be with that mental health practitioner rather than the GP. A real focus on improving communication and continuity of care, so ensuring that people have a named worker to coordinate that care from all of the sort of different services that are involved, and things like having a digital plan. So in terms of one of the big focuses that we've been looking at is around having far more personalised care that looks at the whole range of needs of a person, and we'll come on to some of that detail a little bit later in the presentation. But particularly when we think about mental health, there's lots of things that impact somebody's mental health and their ability to recover and remain in the community, and they can be things around physical health, they can be things around money, addictions, etc. So it's about how we actually personalise that care far more, and wrap that care around individuals. So one of the pushes again is around far more integrated working. And we're very much having those joined up teams that bring those sort of range of mental health professionals together. So where your GP, your social worker and other professionals that might be involved in your care are coordinated, so that we're again reducing the delays and taking into the many different factors that can impact somebody's mental health. Very much is about care being coordinated between the different teams, so that a patient can be helped by a number of different teams at the same time, rather than kind of being moved between them or sitting on a waiting list to get to the next team. And we've also been working with a lot of partner organisations to really bring that expertise to that care. So again, things like around housing, money matters, and again, you'll see some examples of that later. We've done a lot of work to improve our crisis support across the area. So we've had crisis resolution and home treatment teams in place. They work 24/7, and they are commissioned to respond within a 4-hour time frame. Further developments that we've made recently is a crisis cafe that's been opened in Tamworth. And we have lots of different aspects of support in place. So we have things like a place of safety suite. We have things called street triage, which is where we give specialist advice to police officers or mental health nurses in place to give that specialist advice to hopefully avoid further contact with the police. And there's a lot of work around supporting physical health needs alongside that as well. So we know mental health and physical health are inextricably linked at times, and that's the way we need to move forward. So in terms of our community services, this is just giving you a picture really in terms of where some of the MPFT integrated neighbourhood teams are based, and again to give you a sort of idea of the wide range of services and the community venues that people can access across the patch that will do that wraparound support in terms of people's individual needs. And they're just some examples of services that we've commissioned, so like the Citizens Advice Bureau in particular, to deliver that expert advice to our mental health patients and service users. And these are just really some examples of what we've been doing. It's not a finite list. It's just giving you a flavour of what we've got in place. So we've got things like lifestyle services that will focus on diet and physical activity alongside their mental emotional well-being. And we have what's called future focus. So that's actually delivered by Burton and District Mind across the east of the patch. And that's very much that personalised one-to-one support to help people recover around their poor mental health. So this is a case study to sort of articulate really how we see the provision operating now that we have the community mental health transformation in place. So this is Gemma's story. So Gemma's 24. She's got a diagnosis of depression and anorexia, and she often experiences very overwhelming emotions and mood swings. Sometimes she self-harms, and sometimes she does unsafe things like binge drinking. Gemma suffered childhood sexual abuse, and she has had some physical health problems. She's got a poor appetite and poor sleep, but she goes to a community group which she finds really quite helpful. But she's also experiencing domestic violence at the moment from her partner. So in the past, there's a risk that someone in Gemma's situation might be seen by mental health services on an ongoing basis with lots of re-referrals, but without much improvement in sight, just constant sort of re-referrals and episodes of care. To make progress, now Gemma needs a clear treatment pathway with clear goals and an endpoint, and she also needs the right specialist help. So in our pathway now, what Gemma does is she contacts the Access team who complete an assessment, and they really think Gemma will be helped by what's called the Enhanced Intensive Life Skills pathway. And that pathway helps her to learn strategies to manage her symptoms and to meet the goals that she sets for herself. So, for example, learning ways to understand what healthy relationships are and helping her to build a more supportive social circle around her. So Gemma has a mental health worker from the team who coordinates her care. She also has a peer support worker who has had similar mental health difficulties to her in the past. So she can use her experience and empathy to support Gemma. Gemma and the team work out the goals she would like to meet to manage her symptoms, and they explore what those specialist services are. So with support from the Staffordshire Treatment and Recovery Service, which is STARS, Gemma starts to drink less alcohol. She uses her new skills to control her urges and to drink, which also helps her stop doing risky things. She also gets support from a service called New Era, and that's a service that helps anyone affected by domestic violence. So she begins to recognise her self-worth, and she starts to take steps to leave her partner. She also gets input from the Eating Disorders Community Service to help her stay a healthy weight. So she now has those skills to keep eating well. So she's supported to stay in her community support group, and she starts volunteering at an animal shelter, which she really likes. And although Gemma is getting help from lots of services, she's not being moved from one to another, which could cause delays and gaps in her care. Instead, they support her at the same time in a very coordinated way. And Gemma and her named workers from each service regularly meet to update her care plan. She's very much involved and in control of that care plan. So that's just one example of the patient stories. So in terms of the model for dementia-based care, so our core mental health teams support older adults with dementia and other mental health conditions with key services in the community, and they also coordinate a raft of support that's provided by local authorities and also the voluntary sector. And that mental health helpline that you see on the slide there is also available for patients with dementia or their carers and families. So we know that older adults have complex needs, and without the right help, it can be really challenging to find all the support that's needed. Since the George Bryan Centre closed, an older adult specialist is now involved with the patient and care as the first touch point in terms of asking for help. And they help to get the right teams in place for the patient and speed up that process. So they're having that older age adult specialist has been really key following the George Bryan fire. So support is available even before a formal diagnosis of dementia is made. So if you or your loved one have a diagnosis, you'll be supported by the home treatment team with additional support coming from what's called a hospital avoidance team. And the staff work really closely with social care to make sure that the care packages are put in place and that all the adaptations are required, again, to support people to stay within their own community. So again, there's a huge network of voluntary sector providers that provide lots of support. I'm sure you as local councillors will be really familiar with some of these. So the Alzheimer's Society, we've mentioned again, there's the new sort of Safe Haven Crisis Cafe and a new Safe Hands Out of Hours Home sitting service. There's lots of community groups around memory cafes that I'm sure you're aware of, and there's some of the Rotary Club support and Carers Cafe. So there's a whole wealth of really good community support across the area, which is incredibly valuable. So again, a bit like the other slide, this just giving a flavour of the types of services and venues that are available and where they are, showing the breadth. So again, this is just a sample. It's not an exhaustive list, but it just gives you an idea of where things are and where people can get access. So in terms of the actual proposal for delivering mental health services, so as obviously people in this room will be more than aware, since the fire in 2019, the clinicians and staff have been working really hard to find a long-term solution for the services that were based at the George Bryan Centre. So there's been a long period of involving patients and carers and the public throughout this journey, looking at the clinical evidence within the proposal. So there were two proposals that were considered, and that was to keep the 18 beds at this St George's site and to provide the 18 beds at the George Bryan site. However, we are recommending that only one proposal is viable, and that's to make permanent the changes that we made the temporary changes that we made in 2019. So all the evidence is telling us that only one proposal is viable, and that is because a single isolated ward within the George Bryan Centre wouldn't be clinically safe and it wouldn't be sustainable in terms of staffing. And the opportunity that the St George's site provides to provide that really high quality care with a range of different professionals is really significant. So we recognise there are lots of potential positive impacts for that. So again, we're following the single viable proposal would mean that we're following the national best practice. Obviously, because we've moved to a very much a community-based model, that's leading to fewer admissions, helping people to stay independent. in the past, people with low risk complexity mental health needs would have been admitted to hospital. But again, the evidence shows that support in the community gives far better outcomes for those individuals. However, we always recognise there are times when patients do need that intensive medical supervision, and treatment can only be provided in hospital. So obviously we will still admit patients because that's the right course of action, but these patients would be admitted to the inpatient bed in St George's, Stafford. And just so people are aware, if there were high risk mental health needs, regardless of where the patient lived, they would always be treated at St George's Hospital, because that's the environment that could provide the highest level of clinical safety and quality. So again, in terms of that, we believe the 18 bedded isolated ward would not be sustainable in terms of providing that at George O'Brien. We believe better care can be provided on site at the specialist services at St George's, so they have access to things like art therapy, speech therapy, that staff would have to travel if we were to re-provide it at George Bryan. There's much better impact on the workforce. So, a larger site can cover staff sickness and offer that multidisciplinary work more effectively. So whilst George Bryan is sited on a community hospital site, it's not a psychiatric site, so we can't benefit from that staff to support us. And again, there's rapid support for crisis on the St George's site. So St George's has what's called a PQ, a psychiatric intensive care unit, that actually, if patients deteriorated, we can provide that rapid access and support. But we do understand, obviously, there is significant impact in terms of travel difficulties, and we're not walking away from that. We understand that. So we do recognise that obviously that it can create a travel disadvantage for some families and carers, especially those people without cars. And we do know there's a lack of direct public transport as well. And sometimes very complicated journeys can be quite difficult for older adults in particular to manage. If they have to catch 2 buses and things like that. We again know that rural residents will be particularly affected, and recognise again that there could be extra cost to use public transport or cars and things like that in terms of the journey times. What we believe the benefit to that is the impact will be reduced by fewer inpatients being admitted, and when people are admitted, that actually those stays are much shorter than they have been previously. And that's because we can provide evidence of shorter hospital stays at St George's versus those that were on the George Bryan Centre, and that's all in the documentation that's available on the websites. So what we're looking at is basically possible mitigations and ways that to make things easier for people to be for those that will be affected. So what we've looked at kind of previous suggestions from the 2019 involvement. So things like financial support for transport could be considered. We're looking at digital solutions potentially for families and carers. Flexible visiting hours could be one of the things that St George's could look at. So rather than having really strict visiting hours, actually making those a lot more flexible to enable different people to be able to visit. So this is one of the key things that actually we're asking in the consultation is ideas and suggestions and ways that MPFT could support travel and visiting. And again, the activity and travel analysis that we've done around the George Bryan suggested that 75% of patients that actually lived in South East Staffordshire who needed an inpatient stay before obviously the fire happened were actually not admitted to George Bryan. They were admitted to St George's because of the level of complexity. So even when George Bryan Centre was open, most patients from the area and their family and carers still had to travel to St George's because that's where they were admitted. So these are, there we go. So these are the next steps. Obviously, Chair mentioned about the consultation end date. So that's all up there, and Chris has obviously referred to the process in terms of reports of findings. What we're really encouraging everybody to do is to use the consultation surveys, because we really want to hear from people about what their experience is, and we really want to hear from you in terms of ideas for particularly around that travel issue that we know is an impact, and how we can support people more effectively should the single proposal go ahead as part of the results of the consultation. So I'll end there if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you.
We have made members aware of the consultation period and encourage people to engage in it to make sure that they have their say to. And one of the biggest issues is around transport, people getting there and visiting times and all that sort of area, and whether there's a mechanism to reimburse those people who are having to out-of-pocket expenditure getting to hospital and visiting their loved ones. So it certainly is an area that we are concerned about. But I'll open it up now to the committee. So Councillor Evans.
Yeah, thank you for your reasoning on the retention or otherwise of the George Bryan Centre, which obviously you're not intending really to rebuild. I have said in the past that I have been concerned about retaining or at least having a rebuild there because of the patients in this district, or the people that would want to access it. It was easier for them. And you've mentioned travel and the fact that it is expensive to get to Stafford. It is more difficult for patients in certain areas of this district to actually get there. And we also really need to address the fact that there are a lot of people, and elderly people in particular, who may not drive and therefore find it difficult. And you've covered that. I assume that you look at Support Staffordshire and the voluntary transport that is available, but if people are in crisis, it might be that some members of the public don't really want to drive people to get support. You've spoken a lot about dementia, and I understand that. If people are much better within the community, I have members of my family who've had dementia, and so I know what it's like. So I understand all of that. I assume that you will monitor all of this that you've been talking about quite carefully, and we, as the people that are concerned about it, will get the feedback at some stage, because I think that's important. That's one of the assurances I wanted to. But what I have been concerned about in particular, which you haven't spoken about, is mental health issues across the whole age range, particularly young people, because I am actually chair of 2 school governing bodies, and I have seen that the age range for people having mental health problems has got younger and younger, and really those needs need to be addressed when those children are first diagnosed with it, because if you don't do that, not only is it going to be an awful lot more cost to the NHS, but that's by the by, it's their problems that need to be sorted, because there are some children in schools now that are really having very difficult problems. So I hope that you are going to really keep an eye on that. Of course, across mental health across all age ranges is important, but I've been concerned that CAMHS hasn't been effective for a long time. And not only is it not effective, but people cannot get the support they need when they need it. They're having to wait for so long. So I would like some answers to that, because the deterioration of CAMHS and speaking to head teachers, it really is a disappointment. And what has concerned me as well is that some of these children have had suicidal thoughts. They've had attempts at their life, and there have actually been deaths from those children. And really, we don't know, but maybe if their needs could have been addressed, it might have helped in the long run. So as far as the mental health issues across with young people, I've got other questions, but if you can just answer those for me, please.
Yeah, so in terms of the travel, obviously if the proposal goes ahead, then one of the things that MPFD are looking at is what's called a standard operating procedure around supporting travel in terms of financial assistance. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, because we do recognise that that is an area. So that will be for a time limited period, but obviously until the consultation comes to its conclusion, that sort of work is going on in the background. In terms of the crisis response, we do have community teams that will specifically respond to people in crisis. So the expectation is they would go to their homes and support them to effectively assess that and hopefully provide home treatment and not hospital admission. So people wouldn't be asked to sort of travel in a very crisis or distressed situation. This team would support them within their own home, or if it was a hospital admission that was required, that would be facilitated. Sorry, Abby, do you want to? Yeah.
Thank you. Just wanted to say really that it's not our intention to not have services in this locality or in the neighborhood of George Bryant Centre. We want lots of services easily accessible to people. It's only the inpatient facility we are talking about at St. George's. So our total drive in the last few years, especially during COVID and earlier, have been to reach people in their homes. So the crisis service, we used to have one team. We have two teams now, the one in Staffordshire, mid Staffordshire, and one in South and East. And the whole idea is that we should access people and see them, assess them in the home environment to try to intervene early. For that purpose, we've got early intervention teams, we have got crisis teams, we even have a liaison team based at Queen's Hospital. And these are multidisciplinary teams led by consultants, so that if you get in touch anywhere, we can either assess you home, or if you're in an acute hospital, we want to assess you there. So at all stages, the effort is to keep you closer to home and avoid admission. One of the things that, and this is not just applicable to adult mental health or older or people with old age issues, frailty is a very important aspect, and frailty is a priority for ICB. And we have a strategy to ensure that. At the same aspect, we also have a strategy to help the camps, because there has been increased referrals of children. People are practicing differently. Their social media, self-harm is increasing, and we have actually expanded our camp services. We've been able to recruit. We've got new management teams. They are based in different localities: Burnfoot, Lichfield, Burton. So we have camps teams available all across. So they're not centralized. With children, really, we want to help them either in schools or in home environments, so that if we don't nip it in the bud, they become problems later on. So please, our proposal is not to reduce services, it's to expand services and expand specialist services. So, we used to just provide inpatient mother and baby service. Now we have community services. So in all areas, in eating disorders, we've also done the same thing. So we want to be accessible and out there, and not the service we feel is provided safely is the inpatient service, where we have better resource. So I'm a consultant in intensive care unit, and I lead the intensive care unit. So people come to me for a very short period when they're desperately ill, such that they are aggressive, violent, or not. And if they were on a 20-bedded standalone unit, if people start to become aggressive or violent, the only people we have to resort to is police to come and help. And I think we are in a care, we want to develop a therapeutic and care environment where we can treat them safely and get them back out. And I think it's that element that will be, if you look at St. George's Hospital, it's got acute wards, it's got facility for intervention in lots of ways. It's got intensive care units, it's got the mother and baby units, it's got eating disorders, it's got elderly units. So they're arranged, so lots of staff. So if a unit, if there's an emergency one unit, a lot of people can respond. Whereas if you have a standalone unit, you don't have that ability. So in the long run, it will be better for patients. But you raise a very important point. During COVID, the referral rate for CAMS has gone up by 22%. And we have tried to prepare for years ahead. So what we have done is, what COVID did was recognize that there is more morbidity for mental health issues. So the NHS expanded training for doctors and other professionals. So we got more than our share of trainees. So we are training people in camps. So we want to be in a situation, because that's the most difficult area to recruit in. We've got doctors and we train them for 6 years. So they come out as a consultant. And if they work with us for 6 years, we hope that they would stay in Staffordshire. And similar schemes we have used in learning disability, but a lot of expansion has taken place for all sorts of specialties. So I think we are very cognizant of the fact that CAMS is a very, very important area for us to intervene and have strategies to support children.
Thank you. Kenneth Evans, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I've actually been talking to a head teacher today who is concerned about the mental health support that they really need and haven't had. So I hope that you can give us reassurance. But added to that, have you got sufficient staff? Because we know across the whole health system, there is acute need for more doctors, nurses, both in the acute system and in the mental health system. So have you got staff? Are you able to recruit?
In CAMS, we've had lots of success. I think if you look at last year's survey, Midland Partnership Foundation Trust was one of the best mental health trusts to work in. So that is an HSJ survey report. It was issued on the 9th of March. So we are a good employer. We promote training and education. We promote research. So we have got very strong links with universities, and where we have had opportunities to expand. For example, we have expanded our social work training program. That is tremendous, because it's very mental health is a particularly difficult and challenging area for social workers. So we trying to home produce our social worker, and where we have opportunities, for example, physician associates, we have got links with United States, and the purpose of those links is that, well, show us how you do it so we can learn from that. Learn from them. And similarly, we have opportunities to recruit overseas where there are areas where we can't recruit. For example, we have recently recruited 4 child and adolescent psychiatrists who have been assistant and associate professors in Pakistan, and they're coming over next month. We've gone through all the visas and formalities. So they'll be based in the trust. So where we have deficiencies in or difficult to recruit here, we try to go overseas. And that is, ICS is coordinating this, for example, for nurses. So there's a lot of planning going on to ensure that our workforce is fit for purpose and there's enough capacity in that workforce.
Is that?
Can I, or do you want me to?
If you want to, have you got another question?
You probably are aware that Lichfield and Birchwood are friendly communities, dementia-friendly communities now. And any support that you can give us to ensure that everybody in the area understands the dementia and knows what we need to do, particularly those of us that are counsellors, because we are running a group, and it is important that we understand exactly how to address the situation, because we want the community to understand that these people do need help and support at times, and of course aids like being able to go to the toilet when they need to. So that for us, particularly for me in Burntwood, is an important issue, that we do try as much as we can to support people with dementia, because as you said, they'll be in the community, but that is important that they are in the community. And one of the last things I wanted to say was that yesterday in the budget speech, the government told us that they were going to provide an extra £10 million to assist with suicide prevention and support. Obviously, that's going to be welcomed as long as it comes sooner rather than later. I think that it is great if the need for supporting the patients. It's probably early days, but have you any idea how that allocation of money will help you if it comes when it comes?
I think any investment in mental health is very welcome. I think it's because if you look at comparison of mental health, physical health, we are still trying to fight for parity and for more investment. And I think there is now recognition that the employment days lost because of mental health is huge. So wherever we can make interventions in that. And I think what suicide prevention, one of the strategies of suicide prevention is to have easy access. So we got helplines, we got access, our crisis service can respond within 4 hours, anywhere. And once they feel, if the patient requires admission, they can arrange admission. So crisis service has complete authority to do whatever they can. So the first thing they'll do is they'll come and assess you, try to support you in the community. If the risk escalates, they would find a bed for you. And we've always been able to find a bed. I mean, I get bed statement every day. And if there's a crisis and someone needs bed, we are usually very responsive in that.
And finally, Jack, you used to have, and I don't know whether you still do, you may do, mental health professionals that go out with the police. Do you still have that? And are they sort of part of the crisis team?
Yes, so we still have, that's what we call street triage. So it's a mental health nurse that is there dedicated in terms of providing that specialist support to police. So yes, we still have that in place. Just to pick up on some of your other points as well. In terms of suicide prevention, we have a suicide prevention partnership and an action plan that's in place across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, and it has identified a number of areas where we would like to make that investment, but we haven't made those decisions yet, as you say, because it was only announced recently. So there are some areas where we know absolutely we need to support. So some of that is around real-time surveillance. So as people might be aware, in terms of when somebody has committed suicide, it's about providing effective support to those families and family members that have been impacted, because again, they can be at high risk of also suicide as well. So part of that is what we call post-vention support, which is around bereavement. So that's one of the things that we're looking to implement next year as well. In terms of the points around younger people, I think you're absolutely right to raise those. The reason was it wasn't articulated in the presentation is this is focused on adults, and the inpatient changes are specifically adult provision. But you're absolutely right to raise it. It's a really important area. And one of the things, as Dr. Collins rightly articulated in terms of the increased investment that's been made across children's mental health services, one of the things that will be coming to this patch during 23-24 is a mental health support team for the sort of Lichfield district area that will go into schools and be available to support children and young people. So that's one of the developments that we're making. We really welcome all the support that you give around dementia-friendly communities, and you know, your roles are absolutely key to that. And I'm sure we could speak to probably Angie Upton to have a chat with you and see how we can better support you to enable your sort of carers to continue to support those loved ones as well. So those are some of the things that we can look at doing.
Thank you. Councillor Norman.
Did the problem handle earlier? All right,
You
good.
did.
Oh, good. And I'll crack up the police question because the response we just had about that follows on from the dementia-friendly aspect of Burntwood as well as Lichfield, which is what are the barriers to that wraparound care? That's my first question. I kept adding it up because every time a slide came on, I realised there were 6 community services in Tamworth, which is clearly the majority. So I just wonder why that was and why it wasn't elsewhere. Simple question, which is the peer support worker in the slides. Was she a volunteer? Was she, do you have volunteer peer support workers? Are they also employed? And my last question then, if that's okay to ask that, is I used to work for Age UK, so I know about the situation you can have at home with people with dementia, and especially with aggressive and all the rest. So I just wonder what support there is there. There is support and benefits, there is support for families and the rest of it. But I mean, somebody in Australia we had who kept an eye on his mom, because if she left the bed and then he knew when she did go back to bed, and then he'd be able to contact somebody with all the technology. But, the stress on the carers, I can't argue with the idea of it being held, but I just wonder what the extra care was, the extra support was rather for those carers looking after their loved ones with the dementia. So that's my last question. The peer support work is a simple one, surely. Tamworth, what's that about? And then any barriers to wraparound care that we might be able to help with,
Yep, so the peer support workers, they are paid roles. So we're really keen within our workforce expansion and recognise the value that actually people who've had lived experience of mental health bring to being able to support somebody's recovery. So we value those roles and we pay them. Obviously there is still a volunteer programme as well, but in terms of the workforce that we're talking about, in terms of that example, that was a paid role, and we're very keen as well to make sure there's career progression for those roles as well. So Fiona Moore, who's again been supporting some of the involvement around the consultation, is leading that programme with MPFT. In terms of the map of services, if you like, in Tamworth, I'll take your point on that. It does, it was not meant to be a sort of defined list, but yes, we can provide some information about specifically what's across the Lichfield Burntwood area as well. So we'll pick that up. And then in terms of the wraparound care and support for dementia. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if Abby wants to come in on this as well, but when we recognised, obviously, when the George Bryan Centre had to close, the requirement really around supporting older adults and those with dementia in the community needed additional staff. So a number of those staff have been allocated to that also older age specialist team, and what they do is work really closely with social care to support those kind of joint packages of care, really, to maintain people within their own homes and settings. So it's about how we can do more of that, and it's really about how we work not just with MPFT, the local authority and the voluntary sector and the communities, but how we do that together. And I think there's lots of work going on in that area to improve that offer. But I do take your point that sometimes in situations like the one that you just described, where carers can be really worried about family members, etc. But again, that's why we've got things like the urgent access line and help in place that people can call and get advice and support. Abby, do you want to?
I do want. I was just going to say your example really highlighted how important it is to see the patient in their own environment.
Yes.
And to work with the families. So when the older adult beds were closed in George Bryant unit. The consultants, the teams have been going to visit people at home. Sometimes, for example, to make sure that they are managed effectively by the support that is available. There are points when the support is not enough. And at those times they might have to go to residential care, but most of the time all the drive is to enable a patient to be cared for safely at home. But sometimes we also have memory clinics. So, for example, early diagnosis of dementia, because now there are treatments available. So we have to have memory clinics so that people can be diagnosed early. The chances for delaying the onset of more severe memory loss can be prevented by treating them more effectively. But I think the point you highlighted is really important, because that is the main area of assessing people in their own environment to manage risk effectively. And when the risk can't be managed at home, you don't want the relatives to be burdened. And then at those times, you try to look after the patient in different environment to make them so they can recover and be the people they were before the illness actually began.
Yeah. Well, just briefly, just about my dad had a urine infection, then suddenly got dementia. It wasn't a gradual thing at all. In hospital, then he had a test there, which didn't last very long, but it seemed like a long time. And he had a memory test there. Where are you now? He's never been to America. He always wanted to go to America. So the farming over there, and he said America. I thought, blast, And then the second question was, how long have we been here? He said a long time. I thought, yeah, that's true. That is. So 1 out of 2 isn't bad, really. But it's actually seeing people in their own home. This is nothing with dementia, but we had a lady who only went to bed at a certain time and got up at a certain time. But the reason we spent at a certain time was that all the lights in the house had gone. All the bulbs had gone. She weren't able to replace them. And she went to bed when the shop opposite switched their lights off, which was the only light in her bedroom. Nothing to do with dementia, that isn't. But it's that sort of thing where you don't know until you're in the home what sort of issues there are. So I appreciate that, what you said, and what you're hoping to do. So thank you for that, Dr. Thank you.
Any other members? Councillor Egan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've learned a lot tonight. I won't deny it, but I was coming here tonight to bang my drum about retaining the George Bryant Centre. But listening to you three this evening has changed my mind. I understand the involvement of spreading the area. So I'm happy to listen and what you've decided about and what we've got in Lichfield and Birchwood about the dementia memory cafes. In fact, my husband's a volunteer on a Thursday morning here in Lichfield. I understand all that, but what I would like to ask you is, a lot of children, as already been mentioned by my colleague, are developing suicidal thought. It's caused by anxiety at the base of it, isn't it? That's what it is. What I want to ask you is, what are you doing if a child comes, or an adult as well, but I'm leaning towards the children because it's getting more and more and more. I know social media has got a lot to blame with this, but what happens if a young child or a mother comes and says to a GP, my daughter's or my son is suffering from anxiety? What is the procedure then?
Thank you for that. A very good question. I think that there are two things I want to say here at this point. The first is that, we talked earlier about general practices and how people are, how important general practice is. I mean, your debate earlier on highlighted how important the local community feels general practice is. We are going through a program called Mental Health Transformation. That program is because the structure is changed. There are PCNs in existence, primary care networks. So what we are trying to do is work with those primary care networks. We are devolving staff into those primary care networks. So there will be mental health nurses there. There'll be pharmacists there. There will be physios there who someone will back when they can assess and directly refer. So you don't even have to go to the GP. So the whole thrust is upload the front end so that we can recognize things earlier and provide quicker treatment. Now, if a child was unwell and they were referred, they presented in surgery and they were referred to camp service. Camp service will assess. Camp service will not wait, or they won't be. There's nowhere waiting times of X number of months before you see.
Sure.
Absolutely sure, and I'll tell you why I'm sure, because I don't think that it. Sometimes there are waits, for example, for assessment of autism spectrum disorders. They are waits. So if we put someone on wait, we continue to assess them. If the risk changes, they are brought forward. So the lists are not static lists. The lists are dynamic lists. But most assessments take place based on the amount of risk an individual presents or how acute it is. So the more acute and the more high risk, the quicker they'll be seen. But if, for example, there are X number of patients already waiting for, say, autism spectrum disorder assessment, they will be on the list, but the list will be managed. There will be contact numbers given to the parents or families. Should the risk change, please contact us. So it's a dynamic management of those risks. Honestly, our camp services in Staffordshire have improved tremendously. You may not feel that because I see it internally. I mean, we've doubled the number of consultants working in camps, psychologists, nurses, social workers. So we have spread all over. So there are teams based in this locality that provide effective care. But if there's an acute issue, particularly in relation to suicide or self-harm, then they will be assessed much more quickly.
Thank you very much indeed. I feel very reassured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. And just two brief ones from me, hopefully. The first one, I know that's the kind that you said earlier that the facility at St George's has been able to respond quite quickly. It's 4 years since the initial change at George Bryan. How is that looking in terms of the capacity at St George's? Because I think that's one of the major concerns here, is that actually if we're losing capacity, is it going to have an impact? I'm buoyed by the fact that 95% of referrals are going there anyway. But I think it's one thing that we need to be assured of, is that there is sufficient capacity at St George's.
Thank you. I think in terms of modernization of services, it's not just happening in the community, it's also happening in the hospital. So a consultant, for example, I run the intensive care unit. I don't do anything else in terms of any of the clinical commitments. I mean, I run the intensive care and I'm a medical director. I have another consultant works with me, and we're both based in intensive care unit. We don't have any clinics to do or anything. We are there all the time. In the morning at 9 o'clock, my team meets, and this happens in every ward. The team meets to discuss the patients, what's happening with the patients, what should be the plan for what assessment need. And I think that constant presence of a consultant attached to a ward has helped us reduce the length of stay. So our length of stay was 5 weeks plus. It's now down to 24 days or 23 days. So it's come down quite a bit. So that means we've got quicker turnover. So we always have better capacity. And so if a crisis team says that, we have this patient is high risk and they need to come in, they would have started the treatment and they would be finding bed for them. They are the only people who can admit. So if you're in crisis service, you're in the best place you can, because I can't admit a patient myself in my unit, but they can. So it is based entirely on need. So if a patient needs bed, and I get daily reports of bed states, and they're red, amber, or green. I've not seen a red for months. So there is capacity in that sense.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think that idea that that you haven't had red capacity for months is I think the reassurance that I was after there. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. The other point that I want to make is regarding the reimbursement for public transport scheme. Look, public transport, I think it's the answer to so many things. I've got some concerns about that in this instance, I must say. One of the wards in our district, the average distance between somebody's front door and the nearest bus stop is 800 metres. Sorry, it's 900 metres. It's 899 and change. So actually, in that instance, if you are somebody who is potentially a single parent who is providing care for an older relative who is at St George's, you've maybe got a couple of kids that you're going to have to try and corral up almost for a kilometre to get to the bus stop before you even get to a bus to get to Stafford to be able to do that. That's a real problem, I think. Lichfield district, I believe it's about 13% of people don't own a car. So that is a significant proportion. A lot of people can overlook that, I think, quite easily. Sorry, 13% of households don't own a car. And I think, again, that idea that you're going to have to change a significant number of times, I know not necessarily to do with this, and I'm trying to get from certain parts of my ward, which isn't a rural ward, it's the north of Lichfield, trying to get from there to Derby Hospital is an all-day trip on public transport, because you've got to come into here to change to get to Burton, to change to get to Derby, to change to get to the hospital. And making all of those connections on buses that may only be once an hour or once every 20 minutes or whatever the particular time scale is. I think there are problems there. And one of my major concerns actually is that if we're not able to get people to visit, because we know that there's some people who still aren't up to video conferencing yet, there are those people out there in the community. If people can't get to visit, then it causes additional length of stay, it causes additional issues for people who are in patients. But there's also, I think we're all aware, that's going to have a knock-on effect on establishing care plans and being able to deliver care plans to enable those discharges. So I think, as much as, yes, we should have better public transport, and actually if we had better bus services, this would probably be a better solution in terms of that reimbursement. I think in reality, given where the bus service is across Staffordshire, I think you're going to be able to provide a better service by looking at a proper patient transport service, which again is probably not going to be deliverable solely from this process, but alongside other processes and alongside other things that are there. I think it is quite important actually that patient transport gets looked at in the wider context, but I think specifically on this one as well, there are some patches of Staffordshire where you're lucky to see a bus once a week. So I think I've got concerns around that being the only potential solution. I'll close there if I can, Chair.
We absolutely acknowledge that, and that's part of the wealth of information that we want to get through the consultation about what people's ideas are. Again, as Dr. Khan sort of articulated, we don't underestimate the value of being able to see your loved ones in those inpatient settings at all, but it's also about hopefully those admissions being as short a stay as possible, so actually we can get people back into their own homes and their communities as quickly as possible. But absolutely, we'll noted your points and we'll feed that back.
Councillor Cross. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One regarding Gemma's example, the case story there. A couple of the aids and the community orders that were given examples to help her out were drink and drugs rehabilitation, and I think it was help with domestic violence as well. They seem very similar to orders that I dispense in court, and I wondered if there's any crossover opportunities of savings or any liaison with the probation service.
Yeah, so those weren't specific sort of orders. They were obviously as part of the care planning around Gemma. They were services that obviously she agreed to access as part of supporting her recovery. So New Era and STARS were mentioned as part of that. But in terms of sort of orders, so one of the things that we do have within Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent is the mental health treatment orders. and the community support orders. So there is something potentially we could look at there. Again, we just need to speak to colleagues back at MPFT who lead on that, but we can take that feedback back.
Thank you. Another quick one. I know we're running a bit. One of another help to aid people's well-beings is the ability to give something back in the form of work. What sort of help do you encourage to assist people in returning to work or finding work? And are there any agencies out there that you seek or provide assistance for the particular people you deal with?
Should I make a start?
Yeah.
I think, part of recovery is to get the full potential of the individual. And work is really an important aspect of that. So if someone was able to hold down a job before, the aim is to enable them to do the same again. And to this end, we have occupational therapists as an essential part of the team, along with social workers and care workers. And as the patient recovers, to encourage them either to enter education, do courses, or look for employment. And there are a lot of employers that, including ourselves, the Midland Partnership, we offer jobs to people who have been service users in the past. And we have over 100 of those.
Yep. Just to follow up with that, we actually have a specific service that's part of our community mental health transformation. It's called individual placement support, and locally we call the service Step On, and it's actually one of the centres, the National Centres of Excellence, and that purely is that recognising that actually people with severe mental illness do want to go into paid work and get and retain that work, and that service is dedicated to support people into paid employment and to retain that, because they have a lot of assets and value that they can give to that employment workplace. One of the recent developments as well, we are going to be doing this year, is our service that we call IAPT, or Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, or Talking Therapies. We've actually secured funding to have employment advisors within that service as well. So we're obviously expanding that offer in terms of employment support for people who are experiencing poor mental health. So it's a really important point, actually. So thank you for raising that.
Councillor Strachan, you indicated you want to.
It was only a very quick one, Chairman, with my probation hat on, and for Councillor Cross's benefit. STARS, New Era and Humankind are all co-located in probation offices across Staffordshire, and the mental health treatment requirement is delivered nationally in partnership with the NHS and the probation service. So yes, there is already considerable crossover, and I'm sure that they're going to be talking across the whole area. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you for that interjection. Thank you. Councillor Evans, you've got a final question?
Yeah, it just occurred to me that one of the things we do hear about is the problems with suicide in young men. Papyrus, I know, helps with that. But what can be done to help? It really is a difficult situation, because a lot of men don't want to admit that they've got problems, and I assume that you must come across a number of people in that situation. So it is sad that it's like that. Is there anything that can be done to help and support those people?
I think nationally there's a lot more awareness of that. They're encouraging people to talk. I think it is cultural that that you don't want men to be crying or being upset or feeling hurt. But I think media has helped a lot in that. People are much more conscious, and they encourage people to be open. My son, he supports a charity, and he does sort of various endurance events to raise money for that kind of thing. So there is a general awareness in young people, particularly, to feel, you can't feel vulnerable and hurt. So I think it is changing slowly, and we promote that. As a service, in both through our talking services, but also when we get opportunities to see patients in the community.
Thank you, but it is so important.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else before I sort of wrap this up? No. I think you've probably heard from around the table that one of the major concerns is around the transportation and people getting there. So we'd really be interested to see what comes from at the end of the consultation, and if you're willing to come back perhaps and share that with us afterwards, we would really appreciate that at some stage. Can I first, on behalf of the committee, thank you all for coming along this evening and spending your time. It's been very informative. We've learned a lot. We've been able to question you over certain aspects that are happening in relation to the two issues. Thank you all very much indeed. And you are now free to leave. And we will then carry on with our meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To be in front of the camera, Chair.
There's a lot of me, it's hard not to.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 6, which is health matters, and this will be an update from the vice chair who attended the recent health and care committee at County Council. Councillor Norman, briefly.
Thank you. Yeah, no, don't worry. It will be brief. It'll be an odd one, I suppose. Really, the agenda on the day was mental health and mental wellbeing strategy 23 to 28. So there's a lot of information on that. The update on mental health support teams in schools. I did question some of that because there was based on some research, and they were using a word that wasn't in the report, which I've got them to admit they shouldn't have used. I won't go into the details there, but that was also of interest. But it did have a lot of background to that that you could look into. And then item 6 was children's mental health update, which is the presentation of the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent ICB. What I will say is it's the most ridiculous room of all to have scrutiny in. We've got it now here, so it's quite close to the witnesses and that. At Staffordshire, we used to have the children and lifelong learning scrutiny. It was very early days of scrutiny in the council chamber. And I became a chair of that scrutiny committee only after the second meeting, I think, and got it moved into the Oak Room, which is an ordinary room, a rare oval shape. At the council chamber, it's just ridiculous. The people are spread out, of course, across the chamber. There's not many people there, they're spread out. And then on the screen, you've got members of various health bodies and so on. But you can't even see their lips move. The screen is so bad, the light is on it. You don't know who is actually speaking. And even others, I'm not just me, but others are actually complaining. I do hope that Alan White, who was a very good chair of scrutiny in the past at the county, will actually suggest that is changed. Although I suppose it's down to the scrutiny chair, but they should all just walk out. You cannot do scrutiny in that way. Now, I was going to complain on Twitter, but if I had done, and people had gone onto the YouTube version, then what's wrong with that? Yeah, it's all clear on YouTube. You can see the faces. But not if you're actually in the room. So many difficult to do anything. People behind you talking that. And I know you're going to agree with me, Chair. So I'll just leave it there.
I apologise. You actually had to attend. I'm sorry that you had to put up with that. But it is important that we attend and play our part. Looking at the work programme going forward, obviously they're coming to the end of their cycle now. So sorry.
You're moving on, are you?
I am moving on. Yeah. On the work programme. If there's anything on there that we think we want to actually home in on, then that's important that we do. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make it very quick because I know we've been it's been a long meeting already. I think that committee is going to have a look at how Section 106 is used for GP practices. Not so long ago, we had at this committee an application from the ICB for £550,000 for additional GP capacity to do with a specific development at Rugeley Power Station. That should be Section 106. That shouldn't be coming through SIL. So I think we need to go back and we need to have that conversation and make sure that the ICB is, or whatever needs to be connected is connected, so that 106 is used for that, because healthcare is really important and access to primary care is super important.
Councillor Cox, did you want to say something at that stage as you're vice chair of that committee?
Yeah, well, the situation is quite clear with the Rugeley. NG, who obviously own the site.
Andrew Cox, do you want to come forward and just one of the microphones so that people can hear you that are actually watching this on? Thank you.
I can't say too much because of confidentiality, but what I feel I can say is that NG originally offered in their whole scheme a health centre. That in itself was declined, not by the county, but by the ICB. Now, it's beyond my comprehension. Where we go with that, obviously, the fact that things have moved with the site. Regarding section 106, obviously, nothing as yet has come forward in terms of the reserved matters on the application. So there's still a long way to go on that. But I would probably think that if we were to try and persuade whoever, that actually they should be providing, because it'll be the same scenario as Burntwood, that you will have X amount of housing, 2,500, that the current ICB feel that they can displace throughout the surgeries. So I think it is an issue, and it will necessarily will come forward. It has already been muted. I wouldn't say scrutinised, but certainly muted, if that helps committee.
It does, yeah. Councillor Hobbs.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily want to go into the specifics of it because it's not what this committee's for. But I think in terms of us feeding back into the county, I think the county needs to have that discussion with the ICB about making sure that they are accessing Section 106 money when these developments are happening. So that's the point I was trying to make, and through you, Chair, to hopefully feed that in and make sure that the county scrutiny committee is really pushing at that.
Yeah, certainly we'll do that, and the vice chair's heard that now as well. So both of us have got that message. We'll make sure that goes back. Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Cox. Anything else on health matters, anyone, or can we move on to the next item, which is the notes of the task group? And the task group we've got is the climate emergency task group. Are we just noting the comments on the report, or do you want?
No, that wouldn't be good scrutiny, would it? So what I'm going to do is actually just be brief, though, Chair, don't worry. Which is go to the numbers there. 1, is it completed? No, as per item 9. 2, as per item 1, that's been delayed. 3 delayed, 4 delayed, 5 delayed, 6, and that's it. 7 is also so there's been a lot of delays. And if you look at the last meeting, it was in February. The date of February. It was almost a year ago, because I knew the cabinet member at the time wouldn't last, so I waited for him to leave his post, as it were, and then I wanted to give some time to the new cabinet member. And then there's problems with clashing with other issues. They're not from me, but from others, but that's okay. So eventually got the task group there. It is called an emergency, climate emergency. So it's simply a shame that all these delays that have come out in the task group are still there. And if you look at the website, you wouldn't even know we've got a climate emergency, because you'd have difficulty in, and I don't mean because the search engine, which is playing up. I just mean there's no information on there as there ought to be. So we'll see after May what's progress we can make. Chair, thank you.
Yeah, certainly we need to move and act on that. So hopefully that in a new council we can make sure that's a priority, and that task group meets more regularly and actually moves forward and puts some things in place. Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow that very quickly for the purpose of the minutes, the number of days that have elapsed since the climate motion was declared by Council on the 10th of December 2019 is already 10.8% of the way through the deadline of the 1st of January 2050, which we set ourselves. So we've lost 11% of the time, and it's still delayed.
So the clear message: we need to act. We need to act quickly. Okay, and we'll make sure that minutes is taken back and reported back. Okay, we're going to move on now to an update on voter ID. Chrissy Timms is very kindly coming along this evening. We asked at the last meeting when this was delivered to us, that we could just have an update before the election, just to see if there are any issues that we need to be aware of as this is rolled out. Yes,
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can join the thing. Do you want me to plug it in there? And I've got some slides, so yeah, it won't work now. Technology's going to.
Thank you. Can you see it? Right there.
You delayed it on purpose.
Remember, yeah. My questions.
Yes, I don't.
There we go. Lovely, thank you.
You're in the blue lights, that's it. So just a quick refresh of what we talked about last time, just to update you on the situation. So obviously, it's gone live now and we've got them coming through. We're working very hard now to build the election for May 2023, as I'm sure anybody who's studying is aware that everything kicks off next week with the nominations. So we've tried to get as much done as we can in advance of that. Yes, we are a lot more prepared now, I think, than when we first met and talked about this at the last committee meeting. We've had a lot more clarity and a lot more guidance, and obviously the formal training has taken place, and we're starting to see things coming through. So we've given a lot more assurance and reassurance to members about that. Still a big question mark over what's actually going to happen on the day and how it will all go down. But I think in terms of the planning and the preparation, we're where we expected to be, and perhaps if anything a little bit ahead of that, given what we've managed to do in the last few weeks. So just a quick reminder, the acceptable forms of ID and the messaging is getting out of that. I'll come on to what the national campaign's doing and what we've been doing locally in the latter part of this presentation, but obviously just getting that message out there that photo ID has to be provided, and it has to be a government issued or regulated ID that's there. Your gym pass and your works pass aren't necessarily going to be acceptable forms, which I think is probably some of the issues that we might experience on the day, where people think they've got a photo ID, but actually it's not one of the ones that we can accept for the purposes of this. The voter authority certificate, Chris has and Sarah have provided me with some figures on that. So again, that's gone live. It's stabilised now, and we're getting through all of the certificates with just a few minor teething problems, but they are coming through now. So just in terms of some of the other things that are going to change that we've learned since we last talked, is this magical thing called the ballot paper refusal list, which will be an ongoing characteristic of our elections going forward, in which all of our polling staff will be asked to specify and keep a running total of everybody who is refused and the reasons for the refusal. Now, this is really going to be used in very exceptional circumstances, because this is where personation is suspected by the presiding officer, and where perhaps somebody has brought in a slightly dodgy passport photo where you can see they've glued the photo over the top of the existing ones and those sorts of issues, rather than just the general run of the mill. It was taken 10 years ago, and my hairstyle's changed quite a lot since then. So I'm not quite sure why. Yeah, so that log is one that we will always need to do now at every election. So that will be part of our paperwork pack, and it also links to the prescribed questions that we train our presiding officers to ask in the event that they suspect that somebody isn't who they're purporting to be on the day of election. The other interesting piece of the process that's coming in is the snappily titled voter identification evaluation form, or the VIDEF, as we're calling it, and this is a form that we're going to use just at this election and the first general election that we do under this new Elections Act, and that will allow us to track then the amount of people who come in with the wrong ID. So rather than the people who have bought us ID but we don't believe what they're telling us, this is people who bought their works pass or their gym membership, thinking that they can use that as the form of ID for vote, and then we have to send them back home to go and get their passport or their driver's license or something else. So we'll be tracking that for this election, and we will be required to report on that as well as part of the evaluation that the government will be doing of the implementation of the Act. So the new voting process, for those of you familiar, when you come in, the normal step is that the presiding officer will ask the voter for their name and address. They'll find them on the register, make sure that they're there and they're eligible to vote. Then the next step, they will ask them for their photo ID, and they will check that ID is acceptable. It's on the acceptable list, and that they're satisfied that that person is who they say they are. And that, after they've done that check, they will then mark the register, read out the voter selector number as normal, and complete a VIDF or BPRL if needed at that point. So if they're not going to go with that, that's the point at which those forms need to be filled in. So all of that will be on the table. So the tables will be slightly more cluttered than they will have been previously. And then step 4 reverts back to normal. So write over the electoral number onto the corresponding numbers list, and then hand over the ballot paper. So no ballot papers can be issued unless that ID check is made. So in terms of how far we've got, 59 requests so far, not huge, not as many as we were fearing, but certainly manageable. We've got 20 on hold at the moment due to unsuitable pitches, though. That seems to be the bit of the theme, is that people are okay applying for them, but they're taking selfies on their bed or doing half shadow photos of them in the kitchen where the lighting isn't even, so you can't actually make out the features. No, I don't think we've had any George Clooney's or all those sorts of things come through. It is where the background's too busy for you to actually see that person, or the lighting contrast isn't good enough to make out facial features.
And it's need a blank background.
Yes, ideally we need something like that. That's a white background, but appreciating that not everybody has got a perfectly blank background in their house. So we're going with the sort of the high contrast thing where you can clearly see the person's head shape and their features from the picture. So we're being as lenient as we can be, but at the end of the day we have to appreciate that photo is going to be sort of normal photo size, a couple of inches, and that presiding officer has got to, from that, look at that person and make an assessment as to is that person that's presented themselves. So it has to be a realistic opportunity for them to make that assessment. We've also had 2 anonymous voting certificates, because obviously with an anonymous voter, previously they just come in and give us a card, and now they need to be able to prove their ID, but we don't actually know who they are. So they don't bring their passport in, they have to provide a certificate. And the only way they can do it is via the certificates, but they do that via an anonymous process where they apply for it and get it, but nobody at the station actually knows who they are. So we still have to provide that service, and so at the moment we've done 2 of those. So just a reminder, the links will be embedded in this presentation, so I'll ask Will and Chris to circulate that after as well, so you've got these to go forward. So just a quick reminder, voting by post not affected in this election at all, so all the postal votes are going to go ahead fine, and the voting by proxy, the person whose vote it is doesn't need the ID, because obviously they're now coming in, but the person who is attending to collect their ballot paper must show relevant ID for themselves. So if they're acting as a proxy, they have to have the right ID to be able to be given the ballot paper, because it's the person we give the ballot paper to that has to prove their identity. So just in terms of some of the things that we've done on the back of the discussion that we had last time, so we've done a lot of social media. It's been very active on all of our social networks and had quite a lot of engagement. We are linking some of that to the national campaign, and there are some feedback on the national campaign on the next slide. So we've put some stuff into all of our newsletters and our general publications, and that will continue to drip feed up to the date of elections. We've also put some adverts in the local free newspaper that is delivered. There's around 11,000 homes that are covered by that newspaper circulation. And we've got a copy that we'll be providing to parish councils as well. I think that's actually gone out to parish councils already for them to include into their newsletters in the run up to the election. Posters and leaflets have been developed and will shortly be circulated to key partners. So we're doing some leaflets. We also included a leaflet within the council tax letters that reminded people of the need to have photo ID. So press releases will be ongoing. We'll be doing a big launch next week because obviously the poll cards will be going out, and the poll cards will have very clear messaging around the new voter ID. It'll be a clear flash on the front of the actual poll card. There will be A4 fold out, and on the back of them they'll also have a full list of all of the acceptable forms of ID, just to remind everybody. We've also done some targeted work with outreach groups, and I'm doing a series of workshops next Tuesday on the 28th of March, sorry, not Tuesday after, to sort of engage with some groups about what would help them, how to get messaging out a bit more, and also to look at the accessibility of our polling stations. There's been quite a lot of activity. In terms of the national campaign, they're claiming, this was information that was released yesterday, so 63% of the people that they polled using a Murray poll last week now say that they're aware of it, as opposed to 22 around Christmas time when things were starting to be launched. So that's a big shift. From their research, 30% of voting age adults now know about the VAC option if they don't have acceptable forms of ID. Again, that's up from 10%. The TV adverts have been running actively, so they're on ITV, Channel 4 and Sky, and they've been running on some of the social platforms as well. I know I've seen it on YouTube in one of those irritating things that pop up when you're watching a YouTube video. So it's definitely getting around if people are using those mechanisms, but obviously we do appreciate that there will be sections of the population that won't see any of that, and that's where we've been targeting our local efforts, is to fill in the gaps really of those people who aren't getting it through the national campaigns and the national media. Okay, so they're going to continue doing that up until polling day. It's getting quite a lot of traction as well. All the political parties, political programmes have been talking about voter ID and its impact, and there's been lots of discussion on sort of daytime TV and news feeds as well about just letting people know that they need to think about it. It's going to be a thing this year. Interestingly, the government, alongside the campaign that they're running for voter ID, is also running a campaign on voter fraud. So Your Vote Is Yours Alone went live last week, just to give out some messaging, particularly targeting vulnerable groups around voter fraud and ensuring that you're not being persuaded to vote or cajoled to vote in a particular way through coercion from family members, and giving people options to protect themselves if they're in that situation. So yeah, it's interesting that's the timing of that, and the fact that hasn't got an awful lot of traction nationally at the moment, but obviously will hopefully pick up as well. So just a reminder, polling day, we're doing active recruitment now for all of the polling stations, and I'm just finalising all of the training that we're going to be doing for the polling staff. Tomorrow we're going to do an internal briefing to all of our officers who are either going to be presiding officers or looking to be our polling supervisors. So we are going to have an increased number of polling supervisors that will be available on the day to go out and deal with any issues, to support the returning officers, queue bust if necessary, but also, you know, if people are really struggling with you know, complex issues around voter ID, making those decisions as to whether or not somebody can vote, or even just, you know, helping out if somebody is really stuck and they just can't get back to get their ID back, then making sure that we've got people around who can give some support and the right advice. So that recruitment's ongoing, and we've got a really good reception from staff internally to look at those roles, and some good feedback about that as the main route that I think a lot of the councils are going in. They're using superstations and these polling inspectors or supervisor roles to really make sure that we've got everything covered on the day, because it's a bit of an unknown quantity for all of us, unfortunately. So just a reminder, polling is the 4th of May. Stations normally 7 till 10, and then with receipting and a verification at Burntwood into the early hours. And we're doing that primarily because of the constraints that we've got now around the coronation on the Saturday, which means we need to count everything on the Friday. So to have a fighting chance to do that, unfortunately, we do have to verify through the night. But the actual counts themselves won't start until around 10 o'clock on the Friday morning. Hopefully we'll be done and dusted by 5 p.m, but a lot of it will depend on what the numbers in terms of turnout are. We have got a contingency plan which does lead us up into, again, the early hours of Friday if the turnout is a lot more, but yeah, as much as I'd love that the turnout to be as high as possible, I'm not sure I'd fancy two late nights on the trot, but we'll see where we are. We'll have a better idea once close of nominations, because at the moment those figures are based on every poll being contested. I'm sure all the district seats would be contested, but I'm not so sure that all the parishes were, because I know that some of them are struggling for recruitment. So we'll see, but I'll know more on the 6th of April and can advise further then. So we're in the pre-election period. I have been reminded that we shouldn't be using the other P word, because that's not what it's called anymore, although we all colloquially refer to it as that. So it's the pre-election period. So that starts on Monday, and obviously will then run up until the day of the election, and obviously that places specific restrictions on the use of council resources to support any electoral activity. So there will be slightly altered comms around the next couple of weeks, but council business continues as normal.
Thank you for that comprehensive
briefing. Christy, that's really good to hear, and perhaps when it's all done and when a new council, perhaps one of the first things we have on one of our work programs is a review of how it went and how it panned out, and any issues that you had that need to be addressed. Any questions from any members? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, are you certain that there has been letters in everybody's council tax information? Because I have my council tax information today, but there was nothing in it apart from the council tax that I've got to pay. But there was no information at all.
Right, okay, there should have been an insert in that council tax leaflet. Okay, I'll pick that up after with the delivery company.
Just yours and yours?
Yeah.
No, we haven't.
No, we haven't had some. Okay.
Well, maybe it's something we could
That's okay.
look into, but obviously too late now for those that have gone out, but okay. Well, Councillor Cross.
You touched on it. Just are you on track with the accessibility for the new stations that are have trouble with access and mobility?
Yeah, we've done a review of all of the stations. We were pretty good anyway, because we've been very conscious about the DDA requirements of all of our polling stations. There are a couple of issues that where we know we may need to do additional work on the day, because we've had to compromise with some of the locations. Notably, we wanted to use a couple of the schools, and they were reluctant to close. So as a compromise for those, for some of them, we've got mobiles in their car parks, which obviously aren't ideal. They will have the normal ramps and things, but on the day, it just means we need to have staff that are more adequately trained in being able to support visitors who need additional help or access to do that appropriately. So there are a few snagging issues. The group next week that I'm going to meet on the 28th will hopefully help us to put the final touches on. But the additional recommended equipment's been ordered in terms of the privacy booths and the assisted grips and things like that. So all that's in process and train. So we've done an equality impact assessment as well. And obviously, once we've met with the consultation groups and the workshops next week, then we'll update that and revise that plan. But yeah, it's a bit of a work in progress. It is a thing. There isn't a specific checklist. The onus is on us as the returning officer to really just understand what it is, and it's about that engagement piece, that engagement with as many people as we can to say, well, what would help, what would make it easier for you to be able to cast your vote. So there's lots of things to think about within that and unpick. But yeah, if anybody's got any ideas or has specific needs, then please let us know and we'll see what we can do in the time we've got now.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones from me. First one, specifically villages with no polling station. I'm thinking places like Comfort. That we can identify those relatively easy. I think I'm slightly less concerned about places where it's walkable from home to the village, or you're not going to be relying on public transport to get from A to B. One of my concerns is somebody coming home from work, jumping on the bus to try and get to the polling station, saying, "Oh, I've left my passport at home," and then there's no second bus. So I think villages where there's no polling station, I think we need an additional intervention. That might be a place where potentially we can use bin tags, maybe, because I think that's a way of reaching out and making that happen. And then the second point, I'm sure Councillor Cox will be smiling at me when I talk about community power. I know you're meeting with some representatives of hard to reach groups. Is it worth reaching out to faith groups? I'm 90% certain that Churches Together will, yeah, they're on the list. But very specifically, Lichfield Mosque. I'm unaware if they have any of their worshippers who wear a niqab, but that might be somewhere where it's worth that specific intervention to say you will still be able to vote, but there are privacy measures in place. So it's those 2 points from me.
Okay, good point, sir. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you ever so much for that update, Chrissy. Really worthwhile having, and good luck with the rest of it through to the elections. So the next item was a work programme. We've only got one date left on the work programme, and that's in the new council year, which is the 25th of May. The only item that's on there at the moment is to do with the outcomes of the procurement process, and I think possibly the communications may well have drifted into that one as well. Nothing else at this moment in time, and we'll probably leave it for the new ONS group, and that may be to actually put together the new work programme, if anyone's happy with that. With that, item 10 is the exclusion of public and press. I haven't even got the thing to read out.